Welcome back to Eye on Iowa. My name is Sarah Mueller, a breaking news reporter. I'm here with University of Iowa Professor Tim Hagle. Now, we obviously have a lot to dive into immediately. We have Donald Trump's reported indictment announced last night. And just to kind of get started, what are your thoughts? What are your initial thoughts on this news?
Well, my initial thought is that this is going to be a big problem for a variety of reasons. One, of course, is just the political nature of this. People have been talking about it for a number of weeks in terms of the legal theory that's being pushed apparently is very tenuous, trying to increase something that might have been a misdemeanor into a felony, trying to push something that was a federal crime into a state crime. There are questions about the statute of limitations. And then, of course, just in terms of the nomination process, because Trump, of course, is a presidential candidate, and how that's going to affect the race. And of course, for those here in Iowa, the caucus race has already begun effectively. And so there's a lot to be seen what's going to happen. Now, with all of that, I will say that there's some questions, of course, still remaining in terms of we haven't seen the details of the indictment. We don't know the specific charges. Apparently, there are almost 36 charges or counts that are going to be leveled against Trump. So we have to see what those are. We don't know all of what's going to happen, but it certainly seems to have increased the level of chaos that we're seeing in this campaign.
Now, let me ask a question that did cross my mind. Can someone run for president if they've been criminally charged?
Well, the short answer appears to be yes. It can certainly run for president. Anybody can run for president. The bigger question might be is, can you actually be the president? And apparently the Justice Department previously indicated when Trump was the president that they would be unwilling to indict someone who was a sitting president. And so, of course, part of the question was, well, if Trump committed crimes, why didn't you indict him on January 20th once he was out of office? And that didn't happen at the federal level. And again, it devolved to the states. The state seems to be after him, this DA Bragg. So again, we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, you can certainly run. And what makes that interesting is that under normal circumstances, you might say, well, if somebody was indicted for a crime, and if everybody agreed that, yes, this is something that's considered criminal behavior, then pretty much that person would be rejected by the voters and other people wouldn't pay any attention. And so as a practical matter, that person would pretty much be out of the race. But because of the political nature, apparently, of these charges and going after Trump, that it won't probably disqualify him in any practical level. And in fact, his popularity among a number of people will probably increase. And that's one of the things that we'll likely see is that with the next polls taken, that his popularity or his favorability will likely go up.
That's so interesting because I want to hit on that. Obviously, January 6th happened. We all know what happened, but now we have this indictment. You're saying that his favorability might go up. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. That certainly there were a number of people that were hardcore Trump supporters, that they were going to support Trump regardless of anybody else that ran. We're seeing this in sort of the sort of race that we're seeing now between Trump and DeSantis. Even though DeSantis isn't a declared candidate, it seems like he's going to be the main competitor for Trump. And so a lot of hardcore Trump supporters were already directing their criticisms towards DeSantis, including Trump himself. But every time that Trump seemed to be under fire for something, their support for Trump would only increase. And so one of the things that somebody like DeSantis would have had to have hoped to do would be to peel off some Trump supporters that maybe liked Trump's policies, but were maybe getting tired of his approach, his style, and maybe wanted somebody that was still going to be a fighter. That's still important, but maybe with not the antagonistic approach that Trump seemed to have. But with Trump being under fire, political fire, other possible candidates, whether it's DeSantis or Haley or anybody else, they really can't complain about or they're going to complain about the political nature of this. And many of them did, suggesting that this is just a political move on the part of these folks, which basically then means that they can't criticize Trump for it. Where if it had been some other type of crime, who knows what it might have been, bribery or something like that, that then they could say, okay, well, we can't have somebody that's running for president that does this. So other candidates are in this tough situation where they can't criticize Trump, and Trump supporters are going to be even more energized. And some people that maybe would be willing to look at some other candidate are now going to say, well, we can't let the Democrats do this to our candidate, meaning in their eyes Trump, or just Republicans in general. And so that's going to have the effect, at least in the short term, of potentially increasing Trump's favorability. Now, again, we have to wait and see what the specifics are of the indictment, or if it really is something that isn't as on shaky legal ground as everybody, or many people at least, seem to believe right now, then maybe that will change. But right now, I think, and many people on various platforms, media platforms, have suggested that this almost guarantees that not only will Trump win the nomination, but possibly the general election as well.
Now, getting into that a little bit more, what are Iowans going to say to this? I mean, you're talking about this kind of doubling down of support. What do you think we'll see from Iowans?
One of the things that we've seen of late, and we saw this in the midterm elections, is that it's no surprise that the people that are registered as Republican or Democrat have their particular views. Republicans support the Republicans, Democrats, no surprise there. But Iowa, in particular, and many states elsewhere as well, it's the independents, the middle voters, what we call the no party voters here in Iowa, that decide the elections. And they tend to not like the political infighting. So they paid more attention to the economic kitchen table type issues. And we saw that in some of the culture war stuff too, that sort of drifted into the kitchen table area. Basically, they went with Republicans the last couple of election cycles. That's why Iowa went for Trump in 16 and 20, why the Republicans had a really good midterm election here in Iowa in 2022. And they also are not real keen on some of the stuff that's going on, even in the political sphere. Again, they may not pay that close attention to it because they don't like it, but when it gets nasty, then they're going to basically turn away. And apparently there was some poll, and I didn't see the details of this, but something on the order of 70% of the people are looking at this and saying, this is all political, going after Trump. Because you see, and Republicans are perfectly happy to point out all of the Democrats that were high-level people that seem to be engaged in potentially criminal activity and nothing happened to them. And now all of a sudden Trump gets charged for something that seems to be minor. Again, we don't know the details, but it seems to be something that's a bit of a stretch legally. And so they're not going to like that. It seems to be that Democrats are weaponizing, in their view, weaponizing the political system in a way that hasn't happened before. And they're not going to stand for that. And basically, that's why it may push a number of people that were on the sidelines in Trump's camp.
Now, you mentioned Ron DeSantis obviously has not announced yet, but we have Nikki Haley, we have other Republicans eyeing this race as should I enter, should I not? Now, how do you think that this will change the campaign tone among those other candidates? Like, are they going to be using this in their campaign tactics against Trump?
They really can't. And there's sort of a difference here between those that have already declared. So one, of course, is Nikki Haley, and the other is Vivek Ramaswamy. And Ramaswamy is more of an issues candidate, so it's probably not going to affect him too much. Nikki Haley would have been the one. But other candidates that we're expecting to get in, whether it's DeSantis or former Vice President Pence or Pompeo or somebody else, they have to be very careful about this. Now, again, some of the people that are waiting were, as I had indicated in previous interviews, that basically it's like circling the pool to see how cold the water is. In other words, whether it's right to get into the race in some way. This may cause them even greater pause, because if they get in, and even if they don't get in, one of the questions that's undoubtedly going to be asked of them is, well, what do you think of the indictment? What are you going to do about this? And any Republican that basically says, oh yes, Trump should have been indicted, this is terrible, he should go to jail, they're not going to get any support, any Republican support, beyond maybe a couple of percentage points at best. So they can't really criticize, they have to criticize the indictment. They can't really criticize Trump under these circumstances. And so that puts them at a disadvantage, because at some point, whoever the candidate is has to be able to distinguish him or herself from Trump in some particular way. Even if that person supports the policies of Trump, which is most likely going to be the case, and even if a person is willing to fight hard for those policies, still there has to be some difference. Why vote for you rather than Trump? And so it was going to be a tough line to walk even before this. And now, because you're going to have even more problems in terms of you have to express support for, if not support for Trump, at least opposition to the political nature of this indictment. And effectively, that may be seen as support for Trump and make it harder for them to distinguish themselves from Trump. So you may have a few people that were maybe considering getting in that are now going to delay even more. And somebody like Nikki Haley, who's already in the race, is going to have a difficult time and has to be ready. And all these candidates and potential candidates need to be ready to answer that question when it's put to them by media sources.
That's so interesting to me because I was going to ask you if this was going to prompt more GOP candidates to jump in, but you're saying this will give them pause.
I think so. I think that it's really not a good time to jump in part because, as the saying goes, all the oxygen in the room right now is focused on Trump. And to some extent, people, even before the indictment was announced, were almost saying that they thought Trump might hope for an indictment because then all the attention is on him, because everybody knows that he likes to be the eye of attention, the center of the storm, so to speak. And so that's what's going on. So if anybody gets into the race right now, very few people are going to pay attention because all eyes are focused on what's going to happen to Trump. So at this point, if anybody was planning on, making an April announcement, perhaps, and we saw Asa Hutchinson was in Iowa, and somebody asked him about the race, and he says, "Oh well, March is the time for messaging, April's the time for decision making." Well, maybe April you're going to have to wait because everybody's going to be focused on Trump, and it's not going to be a good time for somebody else to try to get in because that person won't get a whole lot of attention.
Now, let's flip sides quickly. If Biden runs and announces his run, how does this impact that?
That's a little hard to say. Again, it's been a little curious that Biden has delayed so long in announcing his election, and it's a combination of factors where it may be that maybe he's looking to see, what are the chances of maybe somebody else, if it wasn't Biden, could somebody else that from the Democrats step up, whether it's Kamala Harris or someone else, Gavin Newsom, governor of California. It didn't seem likely that Harris was favorability is even below Biden's. Newsom probably is not, he's too far to the left. And so it seemed like Biden was really the Democrats' only chance. But Biden is getting older and he has got his own problems to deal with in terms of his record, the economy, high inflation, gas prices, supply chain issues, plus things like how he's handled East Palestine and a few others, the train wreck there. And so he isn't in the strongest position either. And so to some extent, part of the argument is that the Democrats would actually like Trump to be the nominee because they think, well, Biden beat him once, he can beat him again. Well, I'm not so sure of that, in part because Biden now has a record that he's got to run on, and it's not a great one, at least in the eyes of Republicans. You certainly see Democrats trying to defend it. But if you ask, voters, well, when you go to the grocery store, are you paying more for your groceries? And the answer is a resounding yes, whether it's there, the gas station, or someplace else, plus whatever else is going on, the border crisis, fentanyl, all these other things. And so maybe Trump's not looking so bad for some of those middle voters. Plus, when you add in the idea that it looked like maybe they were going after him, plus Biden's other issues with his son Hunter Biden and so forth. So maybe Trump's the Democrats' best hope, but it may not be a very good one.
Now, to round us out, I have to ask about his fundraising, Trump's fundraising. How is this going to impact that? I know there's a lot of rules and regulations around fundraising for a presidential campaign. What's happening with the money?
Well, that's a little hard to say, and I usually try to avoid that. All the campaign rules and regulations just give me a headache, like I'm sure they do a whole lot of other people. But basically, what you often see is that when a candidate comes under attack, he or she is then often able to fundraise after that, saying, "Hey, the other party is after me, help me, beat them back or push us to victory," or whatever it happens to be. And so they often have a surge in fundraising. And again, you had some people that were a little more on the cynical side, I suppose, suggesting that, well, this is what Trump is maybe hoping for too. And my guess is that that's probably what will happen, is that he is a declared candidate, so he does have to be able to, or he is going to be able to fundraise. And basically, he's going to be able to make a pretty good case that this is all political, and it's basically weaponizing the political system against him. And Democrats have gone after Trump for the last several years. And so this basically says, see, I told you so. They were going to do it, and they did. So help me out, help me to win the victory, get back in the White House, send your donation now. And so we'll probably see a pretty big spike in fundraising on the part of Trump.
Now, to round us out, do you have any final thoughts for potential voters about what to expect, anything that they should keep their eye on as we see this Trump proceedings continue?
Well, I think the most general thing I can say is basically to keep your eye on it, that people should pay attention to this. I think this is a pretty important moment. It's a historic moment, and not in a good way, but potentially a dangerous moment. And you've seen people, if you've been paying attention to this over the last day or 12 hours or so since the indictment was announced, a little bit more than 12, I guess, that people are worried a little bit about this. And I think I'm a little shook about it too, that this actually happened, that the person is indicted. Now, an indictment isn't a conviction, and it could get thrown out very quickly because of the tenuous nature of the legal argument that apparently the New York DA is making here. But still, it's worrisome that they were willing to go this far on what seems, at least, to be a very shaky legal ground. Well, okay, we've seen prosecutors in court cases on shaky legal grounds before, but not when it's been against a former president, even one who is maybe as disliked by many as Trump. So we have to see what's going to happen with that. We'll have to see the details. You know, if it does turn out to be a legitimate indictment, if he did get involved in some things that were purely illegal, then I think that it may work out. Still very unusual type of situation, but maybe we can weather that particular storm. I mean, we went through, for those of us old enough to remember, the President Nixon and the Watergate, get the right gate on that one, years where he basically had to resign. And it was only through the fact that President Ford pardoned Nixon that perhaps Nixon didn't get indicted as a former president. So, you know, we've been on the precipice of constitutional crises before. Hopefully we can pull back from this one in some way that actually works to the country's benefit rather than further divide us. But pay attention, get the news, try to get a fair version of the news, and we'll see what happens.
We absolutely will. Thank you so much for coming back on Eye on Iowa, and we'll see you all next time.